Hello, dear students. I am J.E.K. Varghese. We will be starting our first lecture on classification of heat exchangers. Okay, before going to the classification of heat exchangers, we'll see how our lecture series on heat exchangers are organized. So here it is. It is a broad organization of the presentation. We will have a session on classification of heat exchangers, then overall heat transfer coefficient. Overall heat transfer coefficient, which we have already studied in previous modules. Still we will have a review of overall heat transfer coefficient. Then fouling of heat exchanger. This is a phenomenon, and also calculation of the fouling factor. The fouling factor is nothing but the additional resistance incurred due to the fouling. Then we will have analysis of the heat exchangers using log mean temperature difference. So we'll understand the meaning of log mean temperature difference, and we'll derive these four different types of heat exchangers and try to understand how to use this LMTD for the analysis. Then we have effectiveness, concept of effectiveness and number of transfer units. And after understanding the effectiveness and NTU, number of transfer units, we will discuss about the analysis of heat exchanger using effectiveness NTU method. And by that we will come to an end of the theory part, and then we will discuss about certain problems which could be asked in university examination. Preferably we will be discussing about different previous KTU questions and their solution techniques. So now we will begin our first lecture on classification of heat exchangers. Heat exchangers can be classified in different ways. So there are different methods by which heat exchangers can be classified. So in a broad sense, heat exchangers can be classified into recuperators and regenerators. Recuperators and regenerators. Recuperators themselves can be classified into wall separating type streams and direct contact streams. So we have wall separating streams recuperators and direct contact streams recuperators. Now we'll see one by one. In recuperators, the heat exchangers called recuperators. In this case, both the fluids flow simultaneously. So what are both the fluids? There are two fluids. One will be a hot fluid and another will be a cold fluid. Basically, heat exchanger will be transferring heat from a hot fluid to a cold fluid. And recuperators can further be divided into wall separated type. That is, both the streams are separated by a wall. And another type is both the fluids will be mixed together. So in certain types of heat exchangers, the fluids cannot be mixed together. Like if you have water being heated by a hot oil, in these cases this cannot be separated. Or in some other cases, steam will be used to heat water. Again, it may be something like it cannot be mixed together. But in certain cases, for example, in condensers, etc., low pressure, low temperature steam will have to be condensed, and this is made possible in certain cases. This is made possible by spraying cold water into steam. So there is nothing wrong in this cold water getting mixed with the steam. They are mixed together. In this case, there will not be any wall separating these streams. So in precise recuperators can be uh, wall separated type and mixed type. So something which is common for both these types is that both the hot and cold fluid will be flowing simultaneously through the heat exchanger. That's what we call recuperators. In another type of heat exchanger, even though which is not very common in usage nowadays, these are called regenerators. In regenerators, the hot and cold fluids will be flowing on the same surface intermittently. That means first the hot fluid will be flowing over a surface, exchanging its heat to the surface. The surface gets heated up, and then cold fluid will be flowing over the hot surface and exchanging the heat to the cold fluid, which will in turn be heated up. This is what we call regenerators. Regenerators are not very common nowadays. Now, other types of classifications. Other classifications are like constructional wise, we can classify the heat exchangers into double pipe or concentric tube heat exchangers, then cross flow heat exchangers, then shell and tube heat exchangers, compact heat exchangers, etc. But more importantly, based on the directions, heat exchangers can be classified into parallel flow heat exchanger and counter flow heat exchanger. So this is an important type of classification. And there is a third type of classification called cross flow heat exchanger. So uh, parallel flow heat exchanger, counter flow heat exchanger, and cross flow heat exchangers. So we see what is meant by parallel flow heat exchanger. This type of classification is done on concentric tube heat exchangers. So in a concentric tube heat exchanger, there are two tubes. One is an inner tube, one fluid will be flowing through the inner tube, and another fluid will be flowing through the annular space between the inner tube and the outer tube. So typically a hot fluid will be flowing through the inner tube, and through the annular space cold fluid will be flowing. So this is what we call a double pipe heat exchanger. This is the most simple type in construction wise. So double pipe heat exchangers can be classified into parallel flow heat exchanger and counter flow heat exchanger. So in a parallel flow heat exchanger, both the fluids, that means hot fluid and the cold fluid, will be flowing in the same direction. So here we can see that hot fluid enters at the left end of the tube, inner tube, and which exits at the right end. Whereas in the case of counterflow heat exchange, the cold fluid enters at the left end and flows in the same direction as that of the hot fluid and leaves at the right end. So here we know that the arrow shows the direction of hot fluid flow and cold fluid flow. They flow in the same direction. Hence the name parallel flow heat exchanger. And in counterflow heat exchanger, they flow in opposite directions. So here we can see that the hot fluid enters at the left end of the inner tube and leaves at the right end, whereas cold fluid enters at the right end and flows in the opposite direction and leaves in the left end. So here we can see that the arrow shows the directions. This is a hot flow direction and the black arrow shows the cold flow directions. And these two figures, the upper figures, which shows the variation of temperatures of the hot fluid as well as the cold fluids as they are flowing along their respective passages. So this one shows the temperature variation in the case of parallel flow heat exchanger. The pink line shows the temperature variation of hot fluid, whereas this black one shows the temperature variation of cold fluid. So typically the hot fluid temperature, hot fluid inlet temperature is a maximum temperature among these. So hot fluid inlet temperature which enters at the maximum temperature, and as it flows through the tubes its temperature decreases. Why the temperature decreases? Because it exchanges or it transfers its energy to the cold fluid. In a way, cold fluid will get heated up. So hot fluid temperature decreases and it exits at a lower temperature at the outlet, whereas the cold fluid which enters at a very low temperature which receives heat from the hot fluid and which leaves at a comparatively higher temperature. So this is the typically the variation of temperatures of the hot fluid and cold fluid in parallel flow heat exchanger. So here on the other hand, in the case of the counterflow heat exchanger, the direction of flow is for hot fluid will be the same because it enters at a high temperature at its inlet. This is the inlet, and which leaves at a low temperature, and the cold fluid enters with a lowest temperature at the other end, at the opposite end, that is the end at which the hot fluid leaves, and which is getting heated up and which exits at a high temperature. So naturally we would be preferring a counterflow heat exchanger because a counterflow heat exchanger, the cold fluid outlet temperature can be more than that of cold fluid outlet temperature in the case of a parallel flow, provided both the fluid centers at the with the same temperature and same mass flow rate, etc. So this is what here we have: parallel flow heat exchanger, counterflow heat exchanger, etc. And there is a third uh, type of heat exchanger in this classification. Based on the direction, we have a cross flow heat exchanger. So this figure typically shows a cross flow heat exchanger. Both the left as well as the right diagrams show cross flow heat exchanger. So in cross flow heat exchangers, both the fluids are flowing in directions perpendicular to each other. So here in both these cases, the pink one shows the tubes and through which the fluid is flowing. Typically this is a hot fluid flowing through the tubes. Here also hot fluid flowing through the tubes, and the cross flow is the one which flows at 90 degrees to the direction of flow of the tube fluid. So the black arrow shows the direction of flow of the cross flow. Again on the right side also this shows the direction of flow of the cross flow. Here both these differ in one thing, that there is separation of the flow passage for cross flow. So in cross flow there are separations provided for the cross flow so that the fluid will be flowing in different passages. Whereas in the second figure we can see that the cross flow there is no separate passages for that. Actually the cross flow fluid is unmixed in the first case, whereas the cross flow fluids is mixed in the second case. So the first one we can say that both the fluids are unmixed, whereas in the second case one fluid is unmixed whereas the cross flow is mixed. So here variation of temperature occurs for the cross flow. So in this case we can say that for the cross flow the temperature of a fluid at different passages will be different because they will be exchanging heat with two fluids of different temperatures, because two fluid temperature will be varying as it flows along its flow direction. Here in this case, since there is no separate passages, cross flow fluid will be almost mixed and there is a uniformity of temperature of the cross flow in this direction, that is in a direction perpendicular to its own flow direction. Okay, I hope you understood this. any clarification on any point on this, you can send your queries through our WhatsApp group, so that I can address that uh, either in a message form or maybe in a presentation form. Okay, we'll see other types of classifications. Now, construction wise, we can also have another type of classification called compact heat exchangers. In compact heat exchangers, basically, why do we have such a classification? What is the significance of a compact heat exchanger? That is more important. So here, uh, in a heat exchanger, the heat is transferred by conduction convection mode. Radiation will not be there in normal types of heat exchangers, so we are not discussing about radiation. Still, uh, in some cases radiation can be there. So if we assume that there is only convection conduction mode, then the total heat transferred between the hot and the cold fluids can be given by heat is equal to U into area into temperature difference. It's as simple as it is. So whereas U is called U represents the overall heat transfer coefficient, then A is the surface area of heat exchange for convection, and delta T is the temperature difference between hot and cold fluid. So in these three terms, all the three terms are significant in deciding the total heat exchange in watts. So in heat exchangers, normally there will be a limitation for overall heat transfer coefficient, because it depends on heat transfer coefficient at the hot side, conduction resistance, and also the heat transfer coefficient at the cold side. So the overall heat transfer coefficient will be a net effect of or total effect of all these. Since we cannot play much on that, and also the temperature difference between hot and cold fluids also, uh, we will be using, there many uh, constraints on increasing that difference. So what going to matter the most is the ratio of the area to the volume. So if you have a small heat exchanger with a large contact surface area, we can increase the heat exchange, that is increasing A in this equation. So for that, what we do is, just like providing fins, uh, the surface area of the heat exchanger are increased to a very high rate. So normally this is expressed as meter square of surface area per cubic meter of the volume of the heat exchanger. So if this ratio is more than 700 meter square per cubic meter, such heat exchangers are classified as compact heat exchangers. So we can see different designs of compact heat exchangers in this slide. The first one is a fin tube, flat tube continuous plate fins. So we have flat tubes and continuous fins types heat exchangers. Here this is just a cross flow. One fluid will be flowing through this tubes, flat tubes, whereas the other fluid will be flowing normal to that direction. Whereas the second one, it is circular tubes instead of flat tubes. And the third one, we have another design of, you might have seen such enhanced surface area for these things. So we have different designs: circular fin, plate fin, flat tubes, circular tubes with circular fins, like that. And this fourth and the fifth case, they are actually plate fin with a single pass. We have plate fin with a single pass. We have the fluid will be flowing, one fluid will be flowing in this direction, whereas other fluid will be flowing in this direction. So they are cross flow heat exchangers only, but we can see that there is only one pass for each fluid. from left to right, it exits at this end. Whereas in the last figure E, we can see that this fluid, the hot fluid which enters at this end, which will flow through this passage like this, then which returns the second passage through this passage, again it goes back and returns, takes a U-turn, like a 1 pass, 2 pass, 3 pass, like that. And the other fluid also, you have 1 pass, 2 pass, it comes out this and again goes back like this. So the fluids will be in exchanging heat for more time, maybe. Okay, this is what we have compact heat exchangers. Even our human body also has many heat exchangers, like lungs exchanges heat, and which can be, the surface area can be very high as compared to a normal type of compact heat exchangers. It can be as high as 20,000 square meter per cubic meter of the volume. Okay, now we have a very important type of classification, construction wise, we call it shell and tube heat exchangers. So what is a shell and tube heat exchanger? So for that, let's go back to a previous slide where we had concentric tube heat exchangers. There is one inner tube and one outer tube. And hot fluid will be flowing through the one inner tube, cold fluid will be flowing through the annular space. Why can't we think of a design in which there are a large number of smaller tubes inside the bigger tube? So then such designs we have, okay, a shell and tube heat exchanger. So we have a bigger tube and large number of smaller tubes. So the bigger tube will be even bigger, so we call it a shell, and the smaller tubes itself. So we have quite a large number of smaller tubes inside a bigger tube. I'm sorry for that. So in shell and tube heat exchanger, one fluid will be flowing through the shell but outside the tubes. Another fluid will be flowing through the tubes inside the shells. So such heat exchanger is called a shell and tube heat exchanger. So based on the number of passes shell fluid and tube fluid have, okay, I forgot one thing. The fluid which flows through the shell is called a shell fluid, and the fluid which flows through the tubes is called the tube fluid. So we have shell fluid and tube fluid. It can be either hot or cold fluid flowing through the shell, and the other will be flowing through the tubes. So based on the number of passes of the shell flow as well as a tube flow, we can call one shell pass and one tube pass, or one shell pass and two tube pass, like this. So this figure shows one shell pass. Typically shell fluid enters at the left end, which flows to the right side, and which leaves at the right end. So shell fluid has only one pass, and as it passes from left to right, there are baffles provided for the shell fluid, so that it resides inside the shell for a longer time, so that the contact time will be more and maximum heat exchange is possible from the or for the shell fluid. So but there is only one passage, as can be seen in this schematic diagram, whereas the tube fluid, which enters at the right end, at the right header, which is branched into different tubes, flows through the tubes, and which is going out at this end, left end. So one shell pass and one tube pass. Now in the second schematic diagram, we can see that shell fluid enters at the right end, which flows into the left and leaves at the left end. So there is only one passage for the shell fluid. Whereas the tube fluid which enters at the right end, which flows through the tube, then at this end, actually at the left end, uh, which takes back and flows through the tube again. So here what we have is like half the number of tubes the flow will be from right to left, and for half the number of tubes the flow will be from left to right. Suppose there are 30 tubes inside this, 15 tubes, the fluid will be flowing from right to left through the 15 tubes, and the other 15 tubes the fluid will be flowing from left to right. So we can see that there are two tube passes, one pass and then two pass. So here such a heat exchanger is called a one shell pass, two tube pass heat exchanger. And we can have two shell pass and four tube passes like this. So here the shell itself is longitudinally divided into two halves. So shell fluid enters at the right end here in the top half, upper half. This flows from right to left, then which is transferred to the bottom half, then this flows from left to right. The dotted line shows the flow direction of the shell fluid. So for shell fluid or shell flow there are two passes, whereas tube flow, in each shell there are two tube flows. So tube this enters here and takes a return. Again it enters at the other one, takes return. So in total 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 tube passes. So this is called two shell passes and four tube passes. So two shell pass, four tube passes. We can also have two shell pass, six tube passes, or two shell pass, eight tube passes, like that. Basically such designs are altering of such designs are done especially in cases where there are limitations or constraints for increasing the length of a heat exchanger. So in cases where we cannot increase the length of a heat exchanger, what we do is we make it more number of passes for both the shell fluid as well as for tube fluid. This is the classification of heat exchangers. Now along with this, I think we can also have certain two more points: fouling and fouling factor. So what is fouling? Basically heat exchanger will be working continuously over a period of time, maybe months together, like that, because a heat exchanger will be, in many cases a heat exchanger will be used either in a steam turbine power plant or in industries, etc., process industries, etc. So it is a continuously operating device, heat exchanger. So over a period of operation of the heat exchanger, the surfaces of the heat exchanger may be accumulated with the solid deposits. So basically this phenomenon is known as fouling. And fouling can occur due to different reasons. Okay, what are the reasons for fouling, or what are the types of fouling also? So the answer for these two should be the same. Like fouling can occur due to precipitation of solid deposits. So the fluids, water or other fluids will be contaminated with some solid particles, or maybe flue gases will be contaminated with ash particles. In these cases there will be deposits on the surfaces of the fluid passages. So this is called a precipitation of solid deposits. Now another reason for this is chemical fouling, or in essence we can say that there will be the fluid or the contaminants in the fluid will be chemically reacting with the solid surfaces through which they are flowing, and there will be corrosion taking place and the surfaces will become corroded. So such deposits is called corrosion fouling, or we call chemical fouling. Better word is chemical fouling. Now third type is like biological, due to biological reasons like growth of algae or something in water, especially at some high temperature, and the biological fouling can occur. So this is also a deposit. So whatever be the type of deposit, all these types of deposits will cause to have an increase in the resistance, because normally a fresh surface will have only convection, conduction, convection. So conduction will be through the metallic part, and most of the cases metals will be copper as well as possible, and in other cases it can be steel or something. So in addition to that, due to fouling, there will be additional resistance on the surface, and this such resistance, increase in resistance caused due to fouling, is called the fouling factor. The fouling factor is usually represented as the resistance per square meter area. So how do we calculate fouling? Normally, in exam point of view, we will have data available for fouling in different practical cases, and that will be available in the data book also. You can refer to the data book or textbooks for getting the value of fouling factor in different operating conditions. The operating conditions are different. Now, so we have fouling factor. Normally, fouling factor is represented by the letter RF, capital RF. We'll see in the next slide RF. Now, how can the fouling be removed? So, over a period of our operation, that will be coated with the deposits, and this has to be removed properly, or we have to prevent such deposits. So what are the methods by which it can be removed or it can be avoided? So fouling, the first type of fouling, like precipitation of solid deposits, etc., can be removed periodically by scraping the surfaces of the tubes. So normally heat exchanger tubes will be constructed as a removable type. You can take it out, clean it, and then place it back like that. Or you can at least in some cases, in most of the cases, we can actually remove the cover. Then you can use a scrubber or something to clean it and make it clean. Another method by which it can be done is like using treated water in power plants. So this is applicable in cases of chemical fouling. So we just want to make this chemical fouling minimum as possible, avoid the causes. So then water treatment, probably you might have studied water treatment in your chemistry, first year chemistry. So this is the significance of this. This is also very important topic, chemical treatment of water. Now another method is like, if you want to avoid this, you can coat the surfaces, metallic surfaces, with some glass or ceramic surfaces, ceramic coatings. So glass or ceramic coatings which will not react much with the water, and we can avoid chemical fouling. And the biological fouling can be avoided by, again, chemical treatment of water. So algae, etc., also can be removed by this method. These are the different types of fouling and remedy for fouling. And normally, what a fouling can cause to the overall heat transfer coefficient. So here we'll try to calculate the overall heat transfer coefficient for a fresh surface, fresh heat exchanger, that is not fouling, without any fouling. So probably we have studied this. For example, we have circular surfaces, then the fouling or the overall heat transfer coefficient can be given by 1 by UA, whereas U stands for the overall heat transfer coefficient, A stands for the area. So 1 by UA will give resistance. U is the overall heat transfer coefficient. 1 by UA will give resistance, overall resistance, which can be calculated either based on the inner area or the outer area that you have already studied in the first module. So 1 by UA stands for the overall resistance, which can be calculated by 1 by HIAI plus 1 by 2 pi LK log of R out by Ri, or D out by Di plus 1 by H out A out, where AI is 2 pi RIL, 2 pi RIL, where, or pi DIL, where Di is the inner diameter and L is the length of the heat exchanger, whereas A out is the outer area. So it can be represented, overall heat transfer coefficient can be represented either by Ui or as U out, and the terms are explained here actually. The terms are not new, it is not new. This is a case of calculation of overall heat transfer coefficient without fouling. Now, one thing, in an exam point of view, in most of the cases, the value of overall heat transfer coefficient will be given in the problem. You don't have to calculate it. But in certain problems, overall heat transfer coefficient will not be given. Rather, the value of HI, H out, etc. will be given, and the conductivity of the material will also be given, or it will be mentioned like it is neglected. In those cases, you have to use this equation to calculate the overall heat transfer coefficient based on any of the area. And one important thing is that in certain cases, if in the problem HI and H out values are also not given, then you have to use the proper equation from the data book to calculate HI, H out, etc. and then use this equation to calculate the overall heat transfer coefficient. It is a lengthy procedure, and for a 10-mark question, it will be difficult for you to do. But still, if it's asked, you have to be, because calculation of HI, H out, etc. you can do with the help of your knowledge you gained from convection module. Okay, now we can see how to calculate or what changes, what additional resistance is going to be there if the surface is a fouling. So in the case of a surface with the fouling, there will be additional terms. 1 by HIAI was already there in the equation. Then this is fouling factor for the inner surface. So RFI divided by AI, where AI is the inside area, 2 pi RIL. RFI can be taken from the data book or any suitable data available, either in textbook or data book. For exams, you have to use a data book. So please familiarize with the pages in the data book where you have the values of fouling factor for different types of operating conditions. So you have to see the combination of surfaces, operating conditions, period of operation, etc. And based on that, you have to suitably select the value of RFI. RFI is given per square meter area. So RFI will have a unit same as the reciprocal of the HI, and this was there. This is the conduction resistance, and again you have fouling factor for the outer surface divided by area plus 1 by H out A out. So this equation can be used to calculate 1 by UA. This is a total resistance including fouling resistance. So see RFI, RFO, etc. fouling factor on inner and outer surfaces, which are having units meter square Kelvin per watt. So if you remember, watt per meter square Kelvin is a unit of heat transfer coefficient or overall heat transfer coefficient, and meter square Kelvin per watt will be the fouling factor. Basically the fouling factor is given per meter square basis. UA is the conductance and reciprocal of conductance is resistance. 1 by UA or 1 by HA is for resistance. This is a overall resistance and which will have the unit of Kelvin per watt. Now very simple type of calculation in cases where you don't have fouling and also the resistance for conduction through the wall is neglected. In the case of overall heat transfer coefficient, the deciding factor is HI and H out, and majority of the cases this will be very small. So comfortably in some cases you can neglect that also. If it's instructed in the problem, you can neglect the conduction resistance. So 1 by U is approximately equal to 1 by HI plus 1 by HO. Here AI and A out are also considered to be not very considered to be much different. You can say that the surface is very thin, the wall is very thin. So this shows the value of fouling factor in meter square Kelvin per watt for different operating conditions like distilled water, sea water, river water, boiler feed water, etc. Below 50 degrees Celsius, it can be 10 raised to minus 4. Above 50 degrees Celsius, it will be 2 into 10 raised to minus 4 meter square Kelvin per watt. And for fuel oil, it will be like this. Steam oil, you can have like this, all these values. These are some values which can be used. So this table is taken from a textbook. You have to refer to your HMT data book for use it in the examination hall. Now to have a better idea of the probable value of the overall heat transfer coefficient, this is just to give you a physical concept of what shall be the overall heat transfer coefficient in different cases. So in water to water, hot water to cold water, the overall heat transfer coefficient will be somewhere in this range of the order of 1000. Water to oil, it will be small, and water to gasoline or kerosene will be like this. These are some guidelines only. The exact value either you have to calculate or will be given in the problem. So now we will be concluding with our first lecture with these assumptions also. So when we are calculating all these, certain simplified assumptions are made in the analysis of the heat exchanger. First and one is like the heat exchanger is insulated from the surroundings. That means the heat from the hot water will be transferred only to the cold fluid. Heat from the hot fluid will be going only to the cold fluid. That will not be lost to the surroundings or any other part of the heat exchanger. Only hot fluid to the cold fluid. So heat lost by the hot fluid is equal to heat gained by the cold fluid, or MCP delta T of the hot fluid equal to MCP delta T of the cold fluid. This energy balance which we will be making in all the cases for the derivation as well as doing the calculations. So this is very important. Now another assumption is that the heat transfer is purely radial. We assume a one-dimensional heat transfer. So the axial conduction along the tube is negligible. So there is a spelling mistake. Heat transfer is assumed purely in one-dimensional. One-dimensional in the sense it's purely radial. There is no heat transfer along the wall in the axial direction. Now another thing is like we will be balancing the energy. When we make the energy balance, we want or we'll be neglecting the potential and kinetic energy changes of the streams. When we write the steady flow energy equation for heat exchanger, probably if you remember in the third semester steady flow energy equation for heat exchangers, kinetic and potential energy changes are neglected. Only the heat energy and the internal energy MCB delta T changes are taken into account, and also assume that this is steady state, steady flow. Then the fourth assumption is the fluid specific heats are constant. We neglect any change of property with the temperature variation. So this type of analysis is most suitable for cases where there is not much difference in the temperature. If there are large differences in temperature, the properties will change, and this type of analysis, the accuracy will be very less. And also the overall heat transfer coefficient U is a constant. In actual case, the U value will be varying from point to point, but we assume that overall heat transfer coefficient U is a constant. So these are the different points to, or different assumptions to remember. It's better to learn these assumptions by heart, so that if at all it is asked as a short note, you can write it. So now we'll just review what all things we discussed. We saw the different classification of heat exchangers as recuperators and regenerators. And regenerators are very rarely used. Recuperators, both the fluids will be flowing simultaneously. It can be flowing simultaneously by separated by a wall, or it can be mixed together. But the more important type classification is going to be based on the construction wise. You can have a double pipe heat exchanger, cross flow heat exchanger, compact heat exchanger, and shell line tube heat exchangers. Any other types? Okay, we will not discuss any special type of heat exchanger other than these mentioned here. Then we saw double pipe heat exchanger, their classifications like a parallel flow, counter flow, cross flow. Cross flow itself, both fluids unmixed, and one fluid unmixed and one fluid mixed. Then compact heat exchangers, where the surface area per unit volume of the heat exchanger will be very high. Then shell and tube heat exchangers, based on the number of passes for shell and tube fluids, it can be there can be different types of shell and tube heat exchangers. Then we saw fouling. Fouling is a phenomenon caused by the depositing solid particles on the surfaces, which can be caused by simple depositing or precipitation, chemical reactions or corrosion, and biological fouling. And they can be removed mechanically by scrapping, or it can be by treating water, or we can provide a metallic coating. Then calculation of overall heat transfer coefficient and the total resistance. So it can be there can be different equations without fouling or with fouling. So fouling factor also need to be considered in case where fouling is there. A fresh heat exchanger will not have any fouling factor to be taken into account. Then there are certain values for the fouling factor which can be taken from the data book, and some values for the overall heat transfer coefficient, just for an idea, not to be used for to be used for solving problems. The assumptions made in the analysis of heat exchangers. These are the things which I wanted to discuss with you in the first lecture. Thank you.